Good morning. My name is Amalavajra. Welcome to this 1 hour. Why is the spiritual community necessary? I think it's quite interesting at the moment. A lot of us are asking: is the coronavirus crisis changing us? Is it changing us individually, collectively? Is that for the better or for the worse? Are we becoming more generous, or actually are we becoming more selfish? Are we becoming calmer, or are we actually becoming more restless and distracted? Are we becoming wiser, or are we actually becoming more foolish? As this coronavirus crisis develops, and we don't know how long this is going to go on for. What kind of world are we creating right now, and what kind of world will we find ourselves living in at the end of it? And how can, and the crucial one is, how can the spiritual community help? I mean, that's of course the topic here. Why is the spiritual community necessary? Spiritual community, those people who are committed to working on their minds, in our case through Buddhism, how can we help with this? Or would it actually be better for us to just think very practically, let's help volunteer for the NHS, let's deliver some food parcels to elderly people who need it, rather than sort of sitting and reflecting on the nature of reality or meditating. Maybe that's just a bit self-indulgent at the moment. Maybe we should just be getting practical. So in a minute, I'm going to introduce you to a woman called Vajratara, who we're beaming in from West Wales, or South Wales actually, to answer these questions. I'm here in London and at the Brixton Buddhist community, and or the men's community here, and you're, I guess, in your bedroom or wherever you are, watching this on your phone or your laptop, maybe anywhere around the world. So the way it's going to work is we're going to speak for I'm going to ask Vajratara these questions for about 40 minutes. Then you can ask questions of her. And this is a great thing about live stream. You can type your questions into the chat box. She'll then answer your questions. So as soon as those questions come up for you when she's speaking, just type them in, and we'll gather them in and ask her at the end. And then after an hour, we'll take a break for a few minutes, get a cup of tea, and then come all together for those who want to carry on the discussion on Zoom. Yeah. Just to say also, what's significant is that today is what we call True Ratha Day. It's the anniversary of the founding of this global Buddhist movement, True Ratha Buddhist community. It's actually 53 years since Sangha Rochester founded True Ratha, or Friends of the Western Buddhist Order as it was then, here in London. So a very significant day, and that's partly why we've chosen this topic. So Vajratara, who you'll be seeing just up here in a minute, but I just want to say something about her first. Vajratara is a good friend of mine. We've known each other quite a few years. She's something of a prodigy. She came along to a predecessor of this centre down in Clapham years ago when she was just 17, a rather wild 17-year-old, it sounds like, plunged right into the Buddhist life, the spiritual life, and was ordained by the time she was 26, one of the youngest members of our order. And it wasn't that long before she was asked to start training other women to join the order and in Buddhist practice. So she's been doing that for 9 years now, living in Wales at this retreat centre with others. And she's also something of a champion for Buddhism in India. She's the chairwoman of the India Dharma Trust, and in India she's known as the Western daughter of Dr. Ambedkar. Slightly tongue-in-cheek and a bit of an in-joke there, but anyway, very, very well loved out in India for the work she does there. And personally, as you'll soon find out, she's a very lively, fun, very direct woman, no messing about. And the reason is she really wants the truth. That's what that Vajra means, I think, in her name. And she's very committed to creating a spiritual community. She's given her whole adult life really to that, whether here or in India. So she's an excellent person to help us explore this topic of why is a spiritual community necessary. So let's bring in Vajratara. There she is, beamed in magically from Wales. Hello, Vajratara.
Hello,
welcome. Yes, welcome to our live stream, our YouTube live stream this morning. So yeah, actually, just on the significance of this day, What would you say is the significance today of this Triratna Day?
Well, I suppose the significance is that we're celebrating Sangha Rochester setting up quite a radical community. He had quite a different vision of what Buddhism could do in the West. So originally, when he came to the UK, he was presented with two models of Buddhism coming to the West. One of them was a monastic model, one of them was a Buddhist society. And he realized that the Buddhist society, you didn't have to be a practicing Buddhist. You could just sign up if you paid a membership fee. And the monastic setup, to really take Buddhism seriously and to practice wholeheartedly, you had to make a commitment to be a monk. Interestingly, I don't hear much mention of nuns so much at that time in British Buddhism. But what he decided is that what he wanted was something different from both of those models. He wanted a Buddhist community who were committed, who were practicing the Buddhist teachings very wholeheartedly, and yet at the same time didn't have to sign up to a monastic lifestyle, could do that in a family life or within their jobs and careers. Over time, what he realized is actually there were different models where people could live and work together as Buddhists in Buddhist right livelihoods and Buddhist residential communities. But that developed over time.
Well, I suppose in a way you've started to answer my next question, which is we've called this event, or why is spiritual community necessary? I suppose an obvious question is, well, what do we mean by spiritual community? And I say you probably started to answer that already when you talk about Sangha Rochester's vision for Triratna. But I wonder if you might say a bit more about that, about what we mean by spiritual community.
So I suppose you've got two words in there. You've got the word spiritual, which often is, well, it's used in many contexts in many different ways. Sangha Rochester himself had quite a specific use for the word spiritual, which meant, which means that which pertains to higher mental states of unfolding positive emotion, wisdom, and energy. And has a clear goal in mind. So for Buddhists, a spiritual community would involve people who had a common vision, which would be enlightenment, that all beings are capable of developing unlimited compassion, wisdom, and energy, enlightenment itself. Which is very important in India because some of the Indian Buddhists are from what's called the scheduled caste, where they were told that they couldn't gain access to religious knowledge or spiritual practice. So Buddhism says, well, yes, you can. Anyone can practice. Anyone can achieve enlightenment. So there's a common vision, which is the sort of spiritual part, and then there's community, which, you know, it's very easy to think of a spiritual community as just people who are kind of in the same building or something like that. But actually, it's people who are in communication, communication. And I think that's Sangha Rochester's vision of the spiritual community, is people who are really in deep communication about important things together. He called it the vital mutual responsiveness based on common ideals and principles. So that's what the spiritual community is. It's something that we bring in together, into being together by working on our own mental states and by being in full communication together based on common ideals and principles.
I suppose why, maybe this is obvious too, but why do we need that, I guess? Why does that matter?
So, I mean, you can look at the situation now. I think it matters on there's quite a few levels actually on which spiritual community matters. I think because if you look at the situation now, it's multifaceted. You've got the immediate physical needs of people. You know, so you've got, as you were saying, people signing up to the NHS to really kind of respond practically and immediately. So you've got those immediate sort of needs, but you've also got the people's emotional needs and people's, you know, mental health to look at. People are finding themselves often sitting in a very insecure situation at home, with their own, sort of faced with their own minds, sometimes with a lot of insecurity, job, financial insecurity, insecurity about health. So in that situation, we're faced with our own minds, and so the spiritual community can deal with, sort of helps with both those levels. There's the immediate practical need, which we're seeing very much in India, actually, because the spiritual community are in good communication with each other and in good friendships with each other. They can respond immediately to the needs of situation. So in India, what we're finding is there's a huge number of migrant workers, and who are trying to walk back home with very little resources, with no food and no sanitation. And we've got also people who are living in slums who have very little access to food. And it's the Sangha that can respond, or the Buddhist community that can respond very immediately to those things, because they're already in communication and they're well organized. So there's that practical level. In a way, in the West, I don't think that's probably what we're best at, because there's so many people willing to do that. What we are really focusing, I've noticed in the West, in the spiritual community, is focusing on people's emotional and mental health. You know, trying to deal with those big questions about life and death and fear and what are the nature of those things, and trying to respond to those kind of questions, on how to balance sort of mental states over this difficult time. You know, a lot of us have been on retreat for long periods of time. We've been on solitary retreats for a long period of time, and we know how to work on our minds. So we're kind of sharing that as the most immediate sort of help that we can give. But then, of course, there's the big question of what happens in the future. And I think the spiritual community has a big role in helping what next, helping develop what next.
And how well do you think that's going? You talked a bit about how responsive our friends in India are managing to be, and what and what we're trying to do in the West in terms of helping people with their mental and emotional well-being. How well do you think that's going?
Well, as I said, I mean, it's a bit, I think in India it's very effective. I think people really are immediately helping the people who need it most, because they're from the same community, the scheduled caste community. Yeah. In the West, I think this response of people's mental and emotional health is really important and being very effective. As far as I can see, it's very interesting for me, because I seem to have, people have said, oh, it must be great for you to have so much time off. But actually what I've been doing is I've been on the phone a lot to people, and also trying to provide study for people. So that's been really interesting for me, because
maybe just say what you mean by study in case people don't quite know what you mean.
Yeah, so what I've been saying was, I've been writing to various friends saying, would you like to study some Buddhist texts? And the moment I sent out that email, but after about 2 minutes, I started receiving replies saying, absolutely, that's what I want. Give me as much as you can. And it's really interesting, because what I found is that there's a lot online about how to manage your mental health, and how to manage things like anxiety, set up routines, you know, make sure you go out every day, once a day. There's all those kind of things that are online, but actually what people want is to look very much at the heart of the problem, to really look at what is the nature of anxiety itself. How can I really look at life and death and fear, and, you know, the fear of loneliness and what that means. Because even when this crisis is over, we still have to face the problem of death. You know, those big questions don't go away. It's just we're more immediately aware of them at this particular moment in time. And so people, they really want answers. They really want deep communication. They want to talk about those things. They don't want to just manage themselves. They want to look into the nature of something a bit deeper.
And what, I mean, I'm intrigued by, you said, as you say, there's lots of tips out there for how to manage anxiety. but you're wanting to look at what's really the root of anxiety, and what's your answer to that?
Well, I think in a way, what we're learning to see in this crisis, it's like you've had all these plans. I've had all these plans. I had lots of things that I was looking forward to, and the plans have kind of gone. And what I realized is that the plans were only in the mind, so they were only ever in my mind. They weren't a reality. So those plans disappearing, it sort of forces me to look back on the mind itself and a certain attachment I have to the future, and the future looking a particular way. Whereas actually I've had to come much more sort of back to my current reality and what's actually happening now in this moment. So one of the answers in the Buddhist tradition would be to see that to see the nature of mind, to see how it's a dream. It was nothing you could hold on to anyway. There was this idea you had about life, or I had about life. And we're learning to see that actually it was just an idea. And at the same time, also seeing that what's really important underneath in this difficult time is how we connect with each other, and how we move out and engage towards life itself, the environment, and more particularly to other human beings, and how to move out into our connectedness right here and now. And that's what's really important. The plans were never that important. What was really important is the way we connect to each other and move towards each other in these difficult times.
It's quite interesting. There's a sort of this is what I feel, I think, observe when I go out for my daily walk, is there's a kind of when one's afraid and anxious, a kind of shrinking in, a kind of like one of those sea anemones in the ocean. I see people kind of walking around just trying to avoid each other.
Yeah.
I guess obviously from trying to keep the 2 meters distance and so forth, but not even making eye contact stuff. Okay, it is London, so that's kind of normal, but just this kind of shrinking, which I guess actually I've got a bit more sympathy for that, having heard what you just said, because I guess that probably comes out of anxiety and fear. They don't want to get some illness off you. They don't want to, just generally anxious and missing people. And what you seem to be encouraging us to do is to kind of instead, to open up, to open up to others, to open up to the world. Actually,
you're
also to open up to reality.
Yeah, you're not going to get the virus from smiling at people.
That's right.
Or saying hello. And I suppose the other side of it is that we're really seeing, the kind of connections we have in our local community, and people are getting to know their local community in a way they've never known before. Not since I was a child. Which is one of the benefits, and I know that, so I can see it even in Wales. If you meet someone on the road, there can be a bit of a kind of shrinking, and people are sort of almost ignore each other, even though there's like no one else there.
Yes.
So, but then I was yesterday, my neighbour was in her garden doing some gardening, and I stopped to chat to her. And at the end, we just had a little chat about flowers, and she went, "I just want to really thank you for stopping and checking that I'm okay."
Oh, right. Lovely.
So I think, and people are having kind of community WhatsApp groups and looking out for people in the streets. I know my parents are in a village in Somerset, and loads of help and support and offers to buy them their food and things like that. So that's the real benefit, is getting to know our neighbours.
And I suppose so. What's going to make? What do you think is going to make the longer term outcome of this? Whether it's in a year, or we don't know how long before life is back to normal, do we? But whether it's 6 months or a year or even longer. But what do you think is going to make any positive change more permanent, if you like, more sustained?
I think it's 2 things. I mean, one of the things that the Buddhism says is that all things arise on the basis of conditions. So what we set up now, will have an impact in the future. If we try and remain in positive mental states, if we reach out towards other people, if we develop love and compassion, that will have an effect. But I think there's something deeper as well, which is, and this is a point that Sangha Rochester made right in the early days of setting up the order and movement. He said that we're dissatisfied, but we're not dissatisfied enough. That actually, there's things that we're learning now. So we're dissatisfied with the fact that we're, having to lock down and not see our friends and family, which is, fair enough. But I think we can also look at a deeper dissatisfaction in that, why is it that that we spend our lives flying around the world, using more resources than we need, in this kind of constant restlessness when we're always distracted from our own minds. And maybe if we take that dissatisfaction deeper, then we can make some real changes in society. For example, I know I've seen a lot of things online which is saying, it's all very well clapping for the NHS at 8 o'clock in the evening, but what about looking at the whole system where we don't really reward key workers? What about looking at the whole system of how we support people who are running very, very essential services to us, and without whom we couldn't operate as a society? And just looking at those things, there was another one I just thought of which I've now forgotten, but really wanting to make fundamental changes in our lives as well, and looking at the whole way we use distraction to not look at the fundamental issues of life, and to not go deeper in our understanding of ourselves and each other. So yes, I think if we're going to create a different future, I think we have to be even more dissatisfied with the old. It's not just about getting back to normal. We have to really think, well, what do we want normal to be? Is this kind of life we've been living sustainable, and do we want it?
Okay, now when we were talking in preparation for this a couple of days ago, you were talking about this model that you'd learned from Sangha Rochester about Sangha. I think there were a couple of versions. There was a 3 levels and a 4 levels. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that? I just want again. So we've talked a bit about what would society, what would us, and society just means a lot of individuals, obviously like us. What would society, what would people need to do for there to be a positive, longer term change from this period, this extraordinary period? And of course, today is about how can the Sangha contribute to that. So I wonder if this is a good model for you a good time for you to bring in that model, Vajratara.
Yeah, so I suppose Sangha Rochester looked at these questions. This is something also he learned from Dr. Ambedkar. He said he learned from Dr. Ambedkar the real social implications of the Buddhist community. And he looked at that really in three levels. There's the first level is about personal development, that we need a method of personal development, and we need a vision of what's possible for human beings, what's possible spiritually for human beings. He also looked at the communal level, and the way we relate to each other. And also he looked at the level of how we help each other in the world. So there's these 3 levels. There's the personal development, there's a community of people practicing together, and then there's how we give to the world, all beings and the environment. And in a way, he was saying the spiritual community is very necessary for all those levels, because first of all, you've got the level of personal development. And, this isn't just a luxury. I think sometimes in this kind of dialogue, it's seen that this is just a bit of an indulgence, personal development. But actually, in a way, for Sangha Rochester particularly, and from the Buddhist tradition, personal development is kind of the reason that we exist. It's vital to us to grow and develop, because and to become happy and fulfilled human beings. And from the Buddhist point of view, also to move towards the best that we could possibly be, which is in a way symbolized in the figure of the Buddha. So you've got this sort of level of personal development, but then you've also got the fact, and that we're not alone, and that we exist within a kind of communal framework. And this is, I think, Sangharakshita's real sort of depth of understanding of this. It's not just that you, for example, cultivate spiritual friendship and spiritual community just as a kind of way to make yourself feel better. Actually, that is the way things are. The way things are is we're not separate from each other, that we exist as part of life and as part of a network of relationships. So even the Buddha, in his enlightenment, had this desire to share. There's this beautiful story, which is my favorite story in the Pali Canon, and the Buddha calls out one of his senior disciples in the middle of the night and starts just asking him to rejoice in their friend. And I find this very significant, because why would the Buddha, who was enlightened, who didn't sort of need friends, to help and support him, why would the Buddha call out one of his disciples to rejoice in another disciple? And it's really interesting story, because the Buddha starts off by saying, do you approve of Sariputta? And Ananda, who's the disciple he's speaking to, says, well, why would I not? Which is a leading question. Everyone knew that they loved each other. But there was a desire in the Buddha just to share the nature of the spiritual life, because spiritual development is about sharing. It's about realizing how deeply connected we are, even through death. And that was the Buddha's point, that even through death, we're connected. So if we really want to live a kind of happy, fulfilled life, and if we want to go further than that and, gain enlightenment, we need each other. We are each other. We cannot develop on our own without the support and friendship of others. And that's also what makes life so rich and happy. I feel very, very fortunate that I'm locked down with 8 women. Sometimes I don't feel that fortunate. Like moments when I'd quite like to be on my own. But basically, it's a very, very happy and fulfilled and rich life. And it's from those friendships that Sangharakshita said that actually, in a way, that is part of the gift we give to the world. The part of the gift we give to the world is friendship, and support and encouragement, and a kind of a way to live life that's in community. And from that, then we're much more effective in helping other people, because we're in a state of harmony and love, and that makes us effective in the world. It's very difficult to help others if you're in a state of tension and disharmony. So, there is a way that the spiritual community can then respond to others.
And so that's, in a way, what you described in some depth there, is these first 2 levels of, a vision for existence, the Buddha, let's say, and the methods to get there, methods like meditation and ethics and reflection and study. Then that second level of the communal, which you beautifully put just there, about that is our reality, and that's where we any benefit we can give to the world, that's where that comes from. It's from that harmony, that deep harmony. And I suppose that third level is presumably then what reaches out to the world. Could you say a bit more about that third level, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in a way that's the sort of experiment. Right. So it's not always easy to say how we're going to reach into the world, because I think it's a response, going back to communication being a vital mutual responsiveness. But I think if we can act together in harmony, then we can see what people need. And again, I kind of come back to the fact that, yes, there are some practical needs which we really need to help to and respond to, so that a lot of the communities are looking at that, how we can do that most effectively. But I think also there's the level of giving what we know best. So for example, myself here, yes, there's a certain amount of practical help that I'd like to give to the local community, but what I give best are the kind of methods to help people at this time. So meditation being a very, very important one. All sorts of people at the moment are wanting to learn to meditate. Even it's quite surprised me, even people who are sort of stuck at home with their 3 kids or something really want to learn to meditate because they're seeing their own mind. So we can kind of give those gifts of meditation, and real communication to others, real dharmic, which means the Buddhist teaching, or the truth itself. Really discuss things that people don't normally really want to talk about that much. I mean, I know that's what the benefit was for me when I came across the Sangha when I was 17, is that people really, really took me seriously and were willing to discuss difficult areas openly. And we used to stay up late at night, lying around in the sofa in the men's community, talking about all sorts of things. And I remember that excitement of like, oh, here is a place where anything is possible, where we can talk about things, where I can open up what's really going on in my mind, what's really going on in my heart, and people will take me seriously and go that little bit further in my understanding, which in a way I think really I think it almost saved my life at that time.
Well, it's interesting because when we were talking a couple of days ago, we were contrasting our early experiences. That had been your entry into the Sangha, into the spiritual community, into the Buddhism, was those late night chats with those guys in that house on Clapham Common. Whereas for me, I was working in the city at the time as a bond dealer and going to the London Buddhist Centre in East London. And I wasn't interested in community at all. That second level, which you plunge straight into the second level of the communal, I wasn't interested in that at all. I just wanted level 1. I just wanted the methods. I just wanted the techniques, how to meditate. I wanted the experience of calm and pleasure that I experienced there in the London Buddhist Centre shrine room. And then I wanted to go and go back to my life. And I used to like the fact that the classes at London Buddhist Centre, even back then, were so big that you could just come and go and nobody sort of knew who you were. I kind of liked that in a perverse way, because as I say, I could just get on with my life just with this extra bit added on. And I was a bit, I didn't really want to get involved in anything. I didn't want to join anything. I certainly never wanted to get one of these weird Sanskrit or Pali names, that was for sure. Couldn't see the point of that. So
what was it that made you sort of change your mind, since you have got a weird Sanskrit name?
Yeah, I know, somehow here I am, not earning lots of money in the city, and I've got a funny name. Well, it was friendship, actually. It was friendship. It was the communal, actually. But it was because good friends there at the centre, people who are still teaching, like Maitreya Bandhu. I mean, this is back 20 years, but he's still there. Other friends later that reached out as well, like Vajratara and others. They basically reached out to me, sort of befriended me, if you like. If it had been up to me, I would, as I say, nothing would have happened. But I remember, for example, I did like retreats. I remember going on a retreat, a 5-day summer retreat with the London Buddhist Centre, and out from that, Maitreya Bandhu invited me to join a study group, and suddenly I knew that people, and so I joined that, which I enjoyed, but suddenly I knew that people would miss me if I didn't come. And I remember this very particular evening, being out near St Paul's Cathedral, which is where I work near there, and trying to decide, should I get into the St Paul's tube station or not. I didn't really want to go to the Buddhist Centre that night. I didn't feel like it. Just wanted to go home, and I thought, and normally I wouldn't have gone, but I thought, if I don't go, they're going to miss me. They're going to miss me. So I went, and and I remember distinctly realising afterwards that it had been a really good evening that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think it was, I was kind of invited into the Sangha, if you like, by friends like Maitreya Bandhu, and so I had to be kind of coaxed into the communal. But I suppose what that raises for me is a question, which again I think we talked about the other night, which is, what, since we live in a culture is in a way does value sort of the individual, and everyone, it's in a very fairly individualistic culture, for better and worse. I mean, we value individual rights, which is great, but we're also rather individualistic. There's a huge boom in building studio and 1-bedroom flats in the city of London for a reason. So you can understand how probably a lot of people out there are a bit like me, are a bit reluctant to kind of get involved in something, They don't want to lose themselves in some group or something. What would you say to people who might be thinking in that way?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really rational concern, and spiritual communities, including our own to a certain extent, have had some bad press. So,
Mm.
I think the fear is that one's individuality is going to be subsumed and taken away from us, and that actually, I remember this. I don't know if anyone remembers that Happy Monday song. Probably just me, but there's a line in it. He says, "We are the shoeshine crowd, and we are over friendly." And I've always thought, "Oh no, let's not
That's
do that."
Triratna. Triratna's the
Yeah,
shoe
yeah,
shine
I
crowd,
know.
over
The
friendly.
shoeshine crowd. Well, we take our shoes off, so that's one advantage. But when we go to the shrine room anyway. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that there's definitely a rational concern about
Yeah.
having our individuality subsumed, being made to do something which we later regret, look back on and think, well, what was I involved with? So I think that's a rational concern. I think the nature of the spiritual community is what we're trying to do something different, which actually develop in individuals and in a way that makes you sort of more yourself and at the same time less. So that in this sense, what you're trying to do is develop more of your own understanding of one's own mind, thoughts, and feelings. And at the same time, being less governed by what Sangha Rochester called the reactive mind, where we're just responding to just trying to get what we want and not get what we don't want, and our own preferences. So, and that's definitely my experience. Is in a funny kind of way, people become more themselves, and also more willing to go beyond themselves and to communicate with each other. But you definitely want to see in a spiritual community that people are more themselves, are becoming happier, are becoming well, I remember my mother saying to me actually that there was a time when I first became a Buddhist where I lost my sense of humor. And do you remember when you lost your sense of humor? So I think if the spiritual community makes us lose our sense of humor, then that's not a good sign. But hopefully we'll go beyond that and become more ourselves, and we can look out for that. I think in a way you can tell what the spiritual community is like by the nature of the people in the spiritual community. If you see people becoming kind of a bit inward looking and repressed and slightly brainwashed, well then don't join it. But if you see that people are becoming more alive and happier and sort of more engaged and in a funny kind of way more themselves, then then maybe you're onto something. But you have to just try it and see. If people in the spiritual community try and convince you that they're not that they're not brainwashed, it's just going to backfire. You can't do it. You have to just try and find out for yourself.
Is there anything else that I should have asked you, Vajratara, before we go to? We're gonna have questions in a minute, but is there anything else I should have asked you?
I don't think so. I think we've probably covered. Can't think much else. I suppose there's one thing I wanted to say though.
Oh yeah.
Which is the nature of the spiritual community. I mean, it might have come out already, but just to really re-emphasize the point that the spiritual community, it's not just a luxury. It's not just an add-on. In a way, it is life itself, in the sense that we are connected and we don't exist in isolation. And that for Sangha Rochester himself, I think his real understanding of the spiritual life is that the spiritual community is the path. It's the way that we can develop, because it gives us the tools and the support and encouragement to develop. But it's also the goal itself. That in a way, it's unfortunate that we've always got this image of a single Buddha. But actually, if you look at the Buddha's life, he lived his life in kind of a profound kind of love for his friends. He lived in a spiritual community. He said himself that spiritual community is the whole of the spiritual life. So it's also the goal. That's what we're trying to work towards. And harmony in the spiritual community is immensely satisfying. It's the sort of, in a way, it's the best thing that can ever happen to us. And in a way, that value goes beyond whatever troubles we're experiencing in society. So that's really the taste of what I want to sort of leave people with, is that something is possible, that we can bring something into being which is profoundly possible, sort of positive and happy and fulfilled. And, you know, we can start doing that now by the connections that we make with each other.
Good, thank you very much. A lovely evocation of the spiritual community as our goal, not just a means whereby so that we can get happier and get supported to grow, but actually as the goal. Yeah, thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions. If we've got any questions in the chat box. Do we have any questions, Adam?
Yes, we've got one question so far.
Oh, one question. Okay, well, we'll start with that. But do start typing in.
Because we did so well, Amalavajra. We just covered.
Oh, we covered everything, didn't we? Yeah. Yes. What's the question, Adam?
So the question's from Maria. She asked, may the experience of living in a community, especially now, perhaps create certain separation and unawareness of the actual experience of everyday life in the big city?
Yes. Did you hear that, Vajratara?
Yeah. No, I heard that. So as far as I understand the question, it's this concern, isn't it, that if you live in a spiritual community, it's like an isolated bubble, which I mean, I suppose it does have the danger of being, but of course you're not isolated in the sense of you're not out of communication with other people, and the questions that are occurring for everyone are also occurring within the spiritual community, the residential spiritual communities themselves. So, I mean, I know for us, we live in rural Wales, so there's not a lot going around us. But at the same time, we're in a lot of communication with people. So, you know, we do get a sense of what's happening in the world. And I think it's very important that we maintain that sense. But it's also like our friendships within this spiritual community is something that other people can draw on. You know, they can draw on in a funny kind of way. I feel it's really important that I keep up positive mental states and inspired mental states, because then other people can draw on that when they need it from me. So a kind of, I know Sangha Rochester said about spiritual community can be a garden in the wilderness. You know, it's something where people can refresh themselves and delight. And you know, I definitely felt that with the residential community in Clapham when I was younger. The men's community was so welcoming to me. It was a lifeline. It was a lifeline just being with them and hanging out and drinking cups of tea, and Dharma making his sauce mix pancakes, which were unbelievably revolting. But you know,
that sounds revolting.
No, it was really bad. But we have fun, you know. But that was a lifeline. I mean, I'm joking about it, but it really was a lifeline to me in some ways. So I think there's that, but there's also spiritual communities. I mean, we all live and work together. But I know, for example, in London, there's spiritual communities where they're also having to face the big questions. I know in one of them in East London, someone who works the NHS has been asked to be redeployed in an area which might give them high risk of the coronavirus. So they're also living with 12 women. So they have to then make that decision about going back to work and what risks that might give to the 12 people who are living at home, some of whom are in the high risk category. I don't know what conclusion they've come to, but that's the kind of discussions that they'll be facing. Some people in spiritual communities, many people in spiritual communities have lost their jobs and are at high risk and need to be shielded. So it's not, I don't think that we'd ever be completely cut off from the world, and I don't think that's desirable either.
Thank you. Any other questions, Adam?
Yeah, we've got 3 more questions. So starting with Ian, he asks, what tips do you have for imaginatively connecting with the spiritual community when we can't meet in person?
Yeah. Can you hear that? Okay.
So imaginatively connecting with the spiritual community. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously there's a lot of communication going on through the internet via Zoom and phone calls and things like that. But imaginatively connecting, I mean, one of the things that I do as I start to meditate every morning is I bring to mind my friends in this community, and I bring to mind the people that I'm close to. So in this particular Buddhist order, we have a system of official Kalyana Mitras, what's called Kalyana Mitras. So it means you actually have a ceremony where you kind of your connection to each other is witnessed and formalized. So I imagine those people I've had that ceremony with. I bring to mind people who I've ordained into this Buddhist order, and I bring to mind wider and wider all the people in the Sangha that I know, and I really kind of evoke their presence right before right at the beginning of meditation, and also at the end I bring them to mind as well. And actually that's something that I learned to do when I was on solitary retreats. So the longest solitary retreat I've done is 6 weeks. And it really did make me feel that I wasn't alone at any point. In a very mysterious way, I think our connections go much, much deeper than we can imagine. So I suppose that's one thing, is just bringing people to mind. It does have an effect, and personally, I think it has an effect on them as well. If you bring them to mind, if you bring your friends to mind positively in that sense.
I presume that could be sort of within a practice like the Metta Bhavana, or could be just more impromptu. But
yeah, any practice. I mean,
we do have that. Yeah, we do have that practice in which, of course, is explicitly recognising that deep bond that we have with others.
Yeah, so the Metta Bhavana, just to say, because some people don't know, is an actual kind of formal meditation practice of loving kindness towards ourselves, and then our friends and people we know, and to all beings. So there is a formal practice which you could undertake, which I think is important at this time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I believe there's quite a good video. If you don't know the Metta Bhavana, you can look on. I think it's the London Buddhist Centre YouTube channel. Cara Vavati's done a nice Metta Bhavana introduction. If you don't know that. Yeah. Okay. Who's next?
Yeah, question from Liz. She asks, is there a difference between relating to people in a spiritual community and relating to your friends or people that share the same views as yourself?
No, I mean, I think we just relate to everyone on the basis of friendliness, I suppose, and that vital mutual responsiveness. I suppose the difference in the spiritual community is that if people share the same ethical framework and principles and ideals, then you're going to be able to go to places you might not ordinarily go to. But I just think there's always an opportunity for communication at whatever level is possible. Whether it's talking to my neighbour about her flowers, and I'm rubbish at gardening. I think I might have to learn during this time. But in a way, you're having one conversation on the level of flowers, and then on the other part of that is actually just connectedness and goodwill. There's a sort of different conversation going on a deeper level. So I think we can move towards and be friendly towards and try and connect towards anyone, but where we're able to go with that might be different depending on who we're talking about. And that doesn't mean that you can only talk about these things to Buddhists. Aristotle talked about friendship in 3 terms. He said there was the utility, friendship based on utility, which is a mutual need and practical help, and working with people. There's friendship based on pleasure, which is people we really enjoy being with and hanging out, and friendship based on love of the good. And I don't think love of the good is just confined to people with the same religious beliefs as us. But I think when we manage to communicate on the basis of shared love of the good, something really, really magical can happen, and we can go further in a way in our communication than we could have on our own.
Yeah, good. Who's next?
Yeah, we've got a question from Viranaga. He asks, as we're all mostly stuck at home at the moment, what conditions can we create for ourselves that would be the most spiritually useful?
So that's a kind of broad. I think the conditions that we could create for ourselves that most spiritually useful will be. I mean, the idea of having a routine. So this is definitely something I've learned on retreat. Is having a routine is very helpful to make sure you sort of get up at the same time. For me, I meditate first of all, and then I do some qigong or go for a run or something. But also just making sure you have some communication with someone in the day, I think is very important in this time, to make sure you aren't sort of isolating yourself. And it's interesting because what I've noticed is there's a lot about, oh, well, we'll just stay at home and watch Netflix. And actually my impression of people is that actually, by and large, they want to watch a little bit of distraction, but they're increasingly saying, actually, I'm just not in the mood to distract myself. That actually I want a bit more sustenance. So I think it would be good to also look in your life, like where do you come most alive? Where do you feel sort of most excited and inspired? And make sure you keep up that too. Whether it's reading particular books, or just sitting, staring out the window, drinking a cup of tea, or drawing a picture, or whatever it is that makes you feel a bit more inspired. I think it's important to keep that, a little thread of that running through your life as well, where there's a lot of anxiety around. So a time when you feel relaxed and could be just listening to music or something like that, but looking for those things that help us feel a little bit more alive and a little bit more inspired or uplifted is also really important.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a question from Kirsty. She asks, I sometimes feel a little anxious or wary attending spiritual community events, particularly if they involve puja. Do you have any tips to overcome these feelings?
Well, I suppose first of all, I feel very sympathetic. Of course, we're a bit wary. Maybe it's good to look a little bit deeper about what you're wary of and what you think might happen. If you engage with spiritual community or particularly puja, and to keep that in mind and to take that seriously, because there's something in you that kind of wants a voice there, and is probably based on a reasonable concern. And then just give it a go anyway. So you've got that voice, you're in dialogue with that voice that's saying, I'm not sure about this. But then just just give it a go and see what happens. So I know Sangha Rochester talks about well, you sort of, first of all, you have to engage your intuition, and then your reason, and then your experience as well. So just see with your experience, okay, I've had these concerns, I'm a bit wary for these and these reasons. But if I give it a go,
what are those three again?
These are the grounds of faith. I'm sure you're very familiar with them, Amalavajra. Three grounds of faith are intuition, reason, and experience. So sort of quite often it's true with the Sangha as well. We have an intuition like there's something here, there's something a bit special going on here. I know from my experience, everyone was doing the development of loving kindness meditation. I thought, wow, all these different people, and they're all trying to develop love, and that you can develop it directly, you're not just told to be more loving, you can actually develop that state of love. So there was a very strong intuition. And then I had to think about it. So being the sort of character that I am, I listened to all of Sangha Rochester's talks and made notes on them all. I've got them upstairs in this little scruffy pile. So I went through Sangha Rochester's talk. Okay, well, if I want to know what you really think, and thought about it and asked questions, sometimes quite difficult questions to people. Probably sometimes annoyed people in the spiritual community, but kept on asking questions, and then looking at one's experience. Okay, so there might be, like I said before, there might be a wariness that our individuality will be subsumed, or that we'll be spun an untruth, or that someone will make us do something that we don't want to do. So it's important to listen to that voice and then see in one's experience if that actually happens. What's my experience of doing a puja? What's my experience of being with a spiritual community? And look at that whole picture from all of those levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good.
And also, you know, if you're wary about going to one of these Sangha events or online or doing a puja or something like that. Puja, by the way,
Puja, yeah.
is a Buddhist ritual. Then it's also quite good to sometimes check in with someone afterwards and just say how it went, and what your thoughts were about it, and what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy, and what you were resistant to and what you weren't resistant to. So it can be quite good to join in with those Zoom discussions and actually say what your experience actually is. Don't just kind of do it, feel a bit uncomfortable, and then shut down. You know, try and explore that with people. You know, and many people in the Buddhist community have had struggles with Buddhist rituals and different aspects of Buddhist practice. So it's nothing new to them. They don't mind. It's not like you have to enjoy everything in order to be involved, because we've all had our own ways of working and our own struggles with particular aspects of the Buddhist life.
Well, good question. Thank you, Kirsty. That got us going. We'll need to wrap up now. Vajratara just mentioned Zoom, and in a minute we'll break and yeah. So any questions that didn't get answered or anything that's occurred to you that you haven't put in the chat box but would like to say, or just if you just want to hear other people's questions or comments on this topic, join in with the Zoom at 11:45. The link's in the description and possibly in the chat box as well. There's also in the description below the video some further listening and further reading list that Vajratara and I came up with. So if you're really interested in this whole topic of what is the spiritual community, if you're as keen as Vajratara was, and we just want to hear everything there is to be said about this, there's a few lectures and papers there. Also, do subscribe. Also, just below, you can see there's a button that says subscribe to this channel. Don't worry, if you press subscribe, it doesn't mean you're going to get loads of emails. It just means, I don't know what it means really. Well, it's good for us because it means that then we get access to extra services from YouTube once we reach a certain level. I think it's 1,000 actually. But you can also click on the alerts bell, and that will mean that you can just get alerts for any Brixton events coming up. The next event is on Monday night, 7:30, and that will be more meditation focused session, live stream like this, all about working with our craving for sensory experience, and when that gets in the way of our equanimity of mind, if you like, and you'll see that we'll particularly work in meditation on that. But of course, it's true at any time. So that's with Viranaga on Monday night at 7:30. And finally, I want to ask if you would sponsor us in this. What we're doing here is part of this vision that actually is exactly what Vajratara has been describing, is how can we share the Dharma, the spiritual community, methods and a vision with the wider world, with you who are already perhaps involved in Buddhism, or perhaps some of you watching this are not. So we want to reach out and help each of us grow together in the spiritual community. Now, the problem is we've always tended to do that face to face. Coronavirus has ended that, so we're doing this all online now, and that's a new challenge for us. We've got a whole, this is all completely new for us. Fortunately, we've got some help here, and particularly we're being led by Viranaga in this, who's the chairman of the Brixton Buddhist community, and he's been probably at the leading edge of Triratna centres actually worldwide in developing things like this. It's quite complex what we've got going on here. There's 2 cameras, there's Zoom, there's Wales, there's London, there's YouTube involved. I mean, there's quite a lot involved in this, and that's all been Viranaga's vision and ability, albeit with help of others, but he's definitely led on that. So he's really helping us to have effective spiritual community even online. The problem is that now that we're not meeting physically, there's no opportunity for you to put some money in a bowl, or to we're not getting any retreat fees or any class fees or anything like that. Meanwhile, we do need to pay for people like Viranaga. Yeah, so we employ him half time. The rest of us are volunteers, but we employ him half time. He's let's say it's about £600 a month is the cost. so he's not working for much. But we don't have any income to cover that, really. We've got a couple of people doing standing orders. Actually, thank you very much. 4 people set standing orders up, monthly gifts up, after the appeal I did on whenever that was, Wednesday night. So terrific, thank you. And some people gave one-off gifts. But if we just had 12 people do a monthly gift for £50, yeah, that would cover Viranaga's costs, and he can carry on doing this work for us. So 12 people give £50. If you feel inspired, if you think if this is helping you or people you know and you want it to continue, because we are going to have to find some money somehow, otherwise I'm not quite sure what we can do. So, but if you want this to continue, then again, in the notes underneath this video, you can see just a link. You just click on that, and you can set up this gift in just a couple of minutes. It's really easy. So yeah, if you feel inspired, please do sponsor us. So thanks again to Vajratara. She will be joining the Zoom call actually, if you want to come on that. And that will be at 11:45. So give you 15 minutes to make a cup of tea, and then see you on Zoom. Thank you.